An optional essay section can be taken in addition to the multiple choice test on the CLEP exam. Some schools require test takers to complete this section. It is up to you to determine whether you need this essay for the college credit that you're looking for at the college you will be sending your results to. You should check with the school of your choice to confirm whether the essay is required. Test takers are expected to write well-organized essays in clear and precise prose. The essay section is scored by the faculty at the institution, at the college that requests it, and it is still administered in paper and pencil format. Test takers will respond to 2 of 3 essay topics. The first topic, however, is required, and it is a persuasive analysis of a poem. You only have 35 to 40 minutes to do this. I want you to remember to use your knowledge of speaker, tone, theme, mood, length, rhythm, rhyme, meter, everything that you've learned in our modules. Use the new vocabulary that you learned from my lectures. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a poem that could show up on the CLEP exam. This poem is by Jean Toomer, and it's called Reapers. The first thing you should do when you have the poem, and the chance is probably that the poem that the exam will give you is not going to be so long, since you have a short amount of time to do it on the test. So I've selected a poem that's 8 lines long, thinking that it's going to be probably comparable to the poem that you would get on the exam. You will not be able to choose the poem, it will just be the one that the exam chooses for you. So don't get worried, don't get nervous, you can do this. I'm going to take you through how to analyze a poem because I know that poetry can be overwhelming. First, what you have to do is know what you're looking at. So you're going to read the poem. Let's read the poem out loud together. Black reapers, with the sound of steel on stones, are sharpening scythes. I see them place the hones in their hip pockets as a thing that's done, and start their silent swinging, one by one. Black horses drive a mower through the weeds, and there a field rat, startled, squealing, bleeds. His belly close to the ground. I see the blade, blood-stained, continue cutting weeds and shade. Okay, so we've read the poem once, and probably already have some ideas around elements that you can identify immediately in this poem, right? Because you've been studying our poetry terminology and you've read a bunch of the poems that were on the reading list. So let's look at how you are going to approach this. I want you to look at the poem in 3 different ways. Number 1, technical elements. Secondly, the bigger picture of what the poem looks like as one. And thirdly, you're going to derive meaning, but you have to do this in steps. So you're going to apply your knowledge of all of the terminology that we've learned, and I'm going to help you through it now. Let's start by identifying what we know so far. We see that the poem is not divided into stanzas. It is one stanza itself. So that's really important to know. That's something you should write down immediately, the form of the poem, because we've studied so many different kinds of forms, right? Sonnets, villanelles, sestinas, etc. So we'd like to determine the form of this poem. That begins by determining how many lines it is. Well, we know it's 8 lines long, okay? What is an 8-line octave called? Do you remember? Let's identify the lines. We have 8 lines. An 8-line stanza from your studies, you will remember, is an octave. Very impressive for you to be able to point that out immediately, right? So you have a poem that is in the form of an octave. Now, the second thing we want to look at is what elements stand out immediately. Well, as I was reading it out loud, you probably noticed that the poem rhymes. Now, there are 2 different kinds of rhyme, perfect rhyme and slant rhyme. Perfect rhyme is where the words rhyme perfectly. The sound is matched exactly, save for the initial sounds, but the ending sounds are pretty much exact. Slant rhyme is when the words kind of rhyme, but not necessarily perfect sounding, exact. So let's look at our rhymes here. We have end rhymes because they come at the end of the poem. Let's underline our rhyming words. Stones, hones. That sounds like a perfect rhyme to me. Done, won. That sounds like another perfect rhyme to me. Weeds, bleeds, and blade and shade. So we know that these end rhymes are perfect rhymes. Next thing we want to look at is alliteration. Do you remember what alliteration means? Remember, there are two kinds, assonance and consonants. Alliteration is words with the same initial sounds, or words that have a lot of the same similar sounds in them. They're usually used together to form a phonetic sound in the line. Do you see any use of alliteration, either consonants or assonance in this poem? I'm going to identify some for you. Let's look at the first line. Black reapers with the sound of steel on stones. That's a lot of S words. I want to circle them. Let's look at the next line. Our sharpening scythes, I see them place the hones. The sound of S is continuing. Sharpening scythes, I see them place the hones. Let's look at the third line. In their hip pockets as a thing that's done. The sound of S is continuing. Now, sound of S is really unusual too because it has a very sensual sound to it too and repeating like a hiss. And start their silence swinging one by one. Let's identify the S sound in this line. Black horses drive a mower through the weeds. Do we have any alliteration in this line? Yes, we have the th sound. And there, a field rat, startled, squealing, bleeds. He continues the th sound in the next line. Also, continuing the alliteration with S. Let's go to the seventh line. His belly, close to the ground, I see the blade. We're continuing in the S sound. Close to the ground, I see the blade. Blood-stained, continue cutting weeds and shade. He starts to move to another sound in line 7 with B and D. Belly, blade, ground, blood, stained. And we move to C sound, k, continue, cutting, weeds and shade, again with the S sound. So something I would point out immediately is the use of alliteration. Something I'm noticing also is that in the middle of the lines, the alliteration is more consonants, which means it's the repetition of consonant sounds or hard sounds. In the end, on those rhymes, they're more vowel sound and assonance, more open. Hones, stones, done, won, weeds, bleeds. You've got a lot of stuff so far already. I mean, do you see how you're already working this poem? You already have a lot to work with. Talking about the rhymes, let's look at where the rhyme is. Do you remember how to determine rhyme pattern? We use lowercase letters to identify the same sounds. Let's go to the first lines that rhyme. Stones and hones. That's a similar sound that rhymes, so we're going to give it the first letter, A. Let's go to lines 2 and 4. Done and won. The sound is differently from stones and hones, so we're going to give it a different letter, B. Let's go to lines 5 and 6. Weeds and bleeds is a totally different rhyme than the other, so it's going to get a different letter, C. And the final two lines, blade and shade. Again, another different type of rhyme, so it gets another letter. You've identified the pattern of rhyming in the poem. Good job. Now, do you notice that the rhyme is not every other line? You remember how we talked about the forms, the villanelles, sestina, sonnets? They all have very specific rhyming patterns. Remember how we talked about couplets being two lines together, being a two-line stanza? We also covered heroic couplets. Do you remember what they are? Heroic couplets are couplets, obviously two lines together, that rhyme with iambic pentameter. Now, meter is not an easy subject to learn, but I'm going to show you how you can identify what kind of meter is in the poem that you're looking at. We're going to have to read it again in order to do this, and probably have to read it out loud. So if you're in the exam room and you have to do this, even if it looks weird, it's okay. Use your fingers and use your mouth to silently say the words out loud. Meter is about syllables. You have to do this out loud to get it right. And you have to count how many stressed syllables are per line in order to know what kind of meter it is. Because as you remember, meter, either iambic, trochee, dactyl, or anapest, all depends on a different placement of the order of stressed and unstressed syllables. Meter is not an easy technique to learn right away or to practice. I still use my fingers and I count out loud every time I try to determine meter in a poem. So don't think that that's silly at all. I'm going to read the lines to you out loud, and every time I put my finger up, I'm showing you a stressed syllable. A stressed syllable is a syllable that we stress in our natural speech. It may not be easy to determine right away, but maybe by the time I get to the 8th line, you'll start to see a pattern of how I'm reading the meter. So I'm going to look for what syllables I'm stressing when I read the words out loud. Black reapers with the sound of steel on stones. I've identified 5 stressed syllables. Let's go to the next line. Are sharpening scythes, I see them place the hones. Another 5 stressed syllables. 3, in their hip pockets as a thing, in their hip pockets as a thing that's done. 5 again. And start their silent swinging one by one. Black horses drive a mower through the weeds. 5 again. And there a field rat startled squealing bleeds. His belly close to the ground, I see the blade. Blood stained, continue cutting weeds and shade. 5 stressed syllables per line. Do you remember what kind of meter is 5 feet per line? Heroic couplets need to be written in iambic pentameter. That's 5 feet per line in an iamb stressed, unstressed pattern. You've determined so much already from this poem. You're getting really great at this. Now let's look at the speaker. Is the speaker in the third person, first person, or second person? Well, we know that speaker is determined by pronouns, I or me. I know that I see a speaker in this poem because I see two instances where the speaker identifies himself or herself as I. In identifying the speaker, I've also identified some repetition that's really important. Phrases that are repeated. I see as a phrase that's repeated. So we know that our speaker is also first person. We've identified so much so far. There's still a little more. It looks like we've totally dissected this poem, but we're not there yet. Remember, we're still working on the technical aspects, identifying the small things that we see in the poem to identify its form and structure first. In the vein of repetition, you want to find things that are being repeated, because in a small poem, an author will choose to repeat things on purpose. An author would never be redundant in a poem, which means repetition for no purpose. Everything that is repeated is stressed in a way that it is important. Do you see any words that are repeated? In an 8-line poem, any repetition is really important. Well, I identified the phrase "I see" twice. I also see a color being represented twice. Black. When we see color, color is an aspect of symbolism. What does black usually represent? Well, it can represent a lot of things, and we can't go into that right now until we go to step 2, when we analyze the poem from a bigger perspective. Let's look at all the technical aspects that we've identified. We've identified how long the poem is, what kind of stanza that's called, how the rhyme pattern looks, whether there's a name for that rhyme pattern, any repetition of words or phrases, alliteration, which is repetition of sounds, and color and symbolism that we see. Now, as far as technically speaking, you're not going to have a dictionary with you on the exam, so there's no way for you to look up words that you don't know. I don't want that to frustrate you, and don't let that throw you off on your time. Anything that you don't know, don't worry about it. For example, what if you didn't know what a reaper was? Or what if you didn't know what a scythe was? Well, on a 35 to 40-minute essay, you won't be responsible for hitting every single thing because it's just not enough time. So don't worry about overanalyzing the poem to death, because what you really want to fit into it is the stuff that you know for sure. Leave out anything that you're not sure of, okay? So, technically, we've kind of exhausted this poem, all right? Now let's go to part 2, which is stepping back and looking again at the bigger picture of what the poem is saying. Now, what I notice here is that I see kind of a mirror image. I see half of the poem, the first 4 lines, talking about one image. And then I see the second half of the poem talking about another image. Really important right there, right? What did I repeat? Images. Is this poem telling a story? No. So we know the poem is not a narrative. We also know that the poem is giving us images. Now, can we say the poem is inspired by imagism? Let's not go that far yet. But we do know that we're looking at images, and we're looking at 2 separate images. 2 images next to each other. Kind of reminds me of our slides, right? Well, what happens when we have 2 things next to each other? We're comparing them. Do you see things being compared here? I think pretty clearly something is being compared. There's a comparison being made. What is being compared? Black reapers and black horses. What could this mean? Well, do you remember when we talked about a conceit? A conceit is a comparison between two unlike things in a clever way to make a point that the two things are actually not that different. Reapers, if you didn't know, were the people that are in the fields reaping the wheat in this poem. And a scythe is a tool used for harvesting wheat. And more familiarly, it could be seen as the Grim Reaper's scythe. So do you know it's a farm tool now? So if you knew what a scythe was, you would have that symbolism of also death in the poem. But don't be concerned if you didn't get that. You don't need to even go that far. It's okay. If you knew that, use it. If you're not knowing that, don't worry about it. You're only going to put in the essay what you are sure of. This way, you can write confidently and efficiently and express your point very clearly. So a comparison is being made between black reapers and black horses. What could this mean? Well, we know that the reapers are men, and we know that the horses are animals. In the bigger picture, the horses are driving a mower, and they don't stop when they're hurting the animal in the poem. So it's kind of indicative of a machine. So maybe man and machine are being compared. And even if you just wrote in your essay, the poet is comparing black reapers to black horses, that's what you have to write in the essay because you want to show that you understand a comparison is being made. Even if you didn't get as far as the idea of man and animal and man and machine, it's okay, but that is going to come in part 3. So he's using the imagery to make a comparison of two things that seem different from each other, but he's trying to make a point about how they are the same. We have a first-person speaker, which means we have a perspective. We've done it. We've done part 1, the technical aspect, and we've done part 2, which is looking at the bigger picture, and now part 3 is going to be our meaning. What do we think this means? Now, this is up to every writer on his own because you're not going to be able to just determine what a poem means immediately in 35 to 40 minutes, and every student that's going to take that exam is going to have a different interpretation of the poem. Do you remember when we were going over literary criticism and literary theory and how every theory approached the poem differently depending on what it believed literature or a poem should do? From that perspective, this poem could be looked at from 7 different ways, and then you would derive 7 different meanings. What's important is you use what you know to derive a meaning that you understand. It doesn't have to be profound. It just has to be clear. So what are we saying? Maybe that Jean Toomer, the poet, and the speaker in the poem is making a comparison between man and machine, men and animals. What is he saying? Let's read the poem again. Black reapers with the sound of steel on stones are sharpening their scythes. So we see these men in the field sharpening their harvesting tools. I see them place the hones in their hip pockets. Do you know what a hone is? Well, if you didn't, that's okay, but a hone is a tool used for sharpening a knife. So they place their hones in their hip pockets as a thing that's done. That phrase means it's pretty much familiar to them, maybe even like a reflex, like it's just a thing that they do. And start their silent swinging one by one. Notice the word silent. Let's go to the next line. Black horses are driving a mower through the weeds. So the way that the speaker shifts us to line 5 into a next image means immediately we're going from one image to the next, like they're happening simultaneously. That's important. So the black reapers are working, and then the black horses are driving a mower through the weeds. And there, a field rat, startled, squealing, bleeds. In the first 4 lines, we have silence, and in the next 4 lines, we have squealing. Very different things. And it's bleeding. And there, a field rat startled, squealing, bleeds, his belly close to the ground. I see the blade. So the speaker sees both things, the reapers, the horses, and the field rat. The blade, blood-stained, continue cutting weeds and shade. So the blade is blood-stained, but it continues to go, whereas these hones are most likely clean. Comparison. And the horses the mower is continuing to cut weeds and shade. Well, obviously we know a person can cut weeds, but who can cut shade? It can't be cut. That's a metaphor, right? For cutting the day into night. So we see a lot of work being done. The work of the humans, the reapers, is silent, methodical, practiced. It even seems lovely to watch. But the work of the horses is loud, it's messy, it's dirty, and it's even deadly. It's bloody. What could he be saying? Perhaps you might want to write that he's comparing the carefulness of humans and the lack of conscience in animals or machine. We're going to get to that as we write the essay because, like I said, the meaning has to be something you believe. It has to be something you know. It can't be something you're just guessing. And that has no relation to the technical aspects of what you found. So, part 1, we reviewed all of the technical aspects of the poem. And feel free on the exam to do what I have done. Mark it up. This way you can always look at it and you're going to see the connections immediately. Part 2, we pull out our lens and look at the bigger picture of what's happening in the poem. And then part 3, we read the poem again to try to infer what the poet is meaning by what we've discovered in part 1 and 2. Since you only have 35 to 40 minutes, you don't want to talk about any author biography. If you knew who the author was, especially since you've studied for the exam by now a lot, do not include the author biography in this analysis. Authors are not speakers of poems. They are separate. And even confessional poets in analysis, you have to keep it separate, okay? Number 2, you don't want to talk about any words you don't know. That would show that you are not practiced or you don't want to put anything in the essay that shows that you don't know what you're doing. And number 3, any social criticism. You have a short time to write this essay, and your institution that's going to be reviewing it is much more interested in how you're going to analyze the poem based on what you see instead of what you know about happening around it or the environment that it was created in. So be sure not to mention anything outside of the poem. The author bio, any meaning that you don't understand, or any social or political critique of it. Stick to what you know. That's really important. Since you only have 35 to 40 minutes to write this essay, you're going to want to take these 3 parts that I've shown you, the technical aspect, the big picture perspective, and deriving meaning, and you're going to use those to be your body paragraphs in your essay. With that short time of 40 minutes, I think it's a good idea to take about just 10 to 15 minutes to do the analysis. You don't want to rush through it. Because if you rush through it, your essay will be scant and underdeveloped. It won't make sense to start writing the essay if you haven't done the work to write the essay, because your essay will be ineffective. So take the time. Don't panic. You'll be given the full 40 minutes or 35 minutes. So take 10 to 15 minutes to silently and focus on analyzing this poem. Because honestly, the better, more conscientious work you do in the part 1 and part 2 phase of breaking down the poem, the easier it will be for you to write the essay because you will have that much more to write about. So in the next unit, we're going to talk about how you're going to organize all of this information into an outline for the essay.